Joining me this week is an author and screenwriter who has written such novels as True Crime and Don't Say a Word, and is host of the Andrew Klavan Show right here on the YouTube. Andrew Klavan, welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thank you kindly, good to be here.
What do you consider yourself first? Do you consider yourself an author or a screenwriter or now a YouTuber or a commentator? Do any of those sound dirty to you? Which one first?
Well, you know, all I ever wanted to be was a novelist. That was my only ambition, and I was dragged into movie writing against my will. And so I've always just thought of myself as a novelist. Now I've kind of broadened it out because I'm writing a lot of nonfiction too. An author. I'll call myself a man of letters. I am strangely find myself in front of a camera and have not yet become comfortable with it because I've spent most of my life in a room by myself.
Yeah, so you're freaking out right now. You're in front of a camera a lot. I know, for a guy that...
I start to froth at the mouth and things like that. No, you know, it's funny. I've gotten used to it. But I think of myself as a person who writes and then goes on camera sometimes and reads what I write.
Yeah. So for somebody that writes and that you've seen your books turn into films and things like that, how much of the process do you fear giving up at some point? You know, when it's one thing when you're writing something and now you do it on YouTube directly for some of the package pieces you've done, or you're just sharing your thoughts as you are. You didn't pre-write anything.
Yeah, I didn't. And I'm a little nervous about that. But
you're right. You never know what's going to happen. But when you've seen your words turn into other things, what's it like giving up that power? I always think that must be incredibly difficult.
Well, there's two things. I mean, when you give a book over to the movie people, if you don't just kiss it goodbye, they'll drive you insane, you know, because they're not going to make this. And in some ways they shouldn't. They should get at the essence of your book without really, because it's a different art form, they should do the narrative the way the movie demands the narrative be done. But you really have to let it go. And it can be very, very painful. I mean, there's a moment in True Crime that Clint Eastwood made where the central moment in the book is the reporter saying, you know, I don't care about right or wrong, I don't care about Jesus, I don't care about anything, all I care about are the things that happen. You know, that's
right.
my
this is powerful stuff.
And that's the central moment in the book. And it's in the movie, and he says, and all I care about is I have a nose for news. And I thought, you know, please pluck this arrow from my heart.
Yeah.
But mostly I'm pretty good at it. I always think of the great crime writer James M. Cain, who they made Double Indemnity, and The Postman Always Rings Twice. And somebody said, how do you feel about what Hollywood did to your books? And he said, Hollywood did nothing to my books. They're right over there on the shelf, you know. And I try to keep that attitude. What I do have a hard time with is I have a hard time going in front of a camera and expressing my opinion and knowing I might get something wrong.
Yeah.
Because when you write, I write and I rewrite and I rewrite again, and I very rarely make mistakes on published material at all. Occasionally on a fast blog.
I have a list of gotcha questions here, and each one more confusing and double-worded than the next. But there's so much that I want to get into with you because you are a conservative. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is.
You're a conservative. Now, we're taping this. I want everyone to understand. We're taping this before the election. It's going to be aired a little bit after the election, just because everyone knows we're doing our home studio thing, so we're just getting a little ahead of ourselves in content, and you're being good enough to play along with us.
Okay.
It's the magic of television or the internet, I suppose. So we're not going to talk about the minutia of the election per se, but I just want to talk about sort of the broad philosophical things that have happened in the country for the past year. So for you as a conservative, now, again, we don't know if Trump's the president or not right now, or Clinton or whoever. How did you feel the conservative movement fared during the election?
Well, I felt that I lost this election when Donald Trump was nominated. And I decided that I was going to let myself go through the process, the grieving process, and let it go at that moment, because there was no one running who represented anything that I believe, which is mostly what I believe in is personal liberty. I believe that you were made to be free, that is the point and purpose of your life.
How dare you put that on me?
For you to find your own way and do what it is that you were prompted by yourself to do without obviously running over my foot as you do it.
Right.
There was nobody running after Trump was nominated who agreed, who believed in that point of view. Plus, there was nobody running who met, for me, the minimum standard of honesty. Of lack of corruption, because corruption, it really is a worm in the political body. It really does destroy almost more than bad ideas. Bad ideas destroy things, but corruption can destroy even when you have good ideas. And so there was no good outcome for me. And that's something that happened. Look, that's something that happens in a democracy. I can't always win.
Yeah.
Freedom is always, somebody once said this, freedom is always a minority point of view. What people think that they want to be free, but what they really want is to be free to tell you what to do. They want to be free to do what they want to do, but you have to do what they want to do as well.
Right.
And so you're always kind of looking for a coalition, and that coalition fell apart. Now, the proudest thing I can say, and it's a really sad thing to say, is that the Republicans nominated a corrupt, leftist authoritarian because our machine fell apart. The Democrats nominated a corrupt authoritarian leftist because their machine worked perfectly. So we did, by accident, what they do on purpose, which is fitting because we're the stupid party and they're the evil party. And so that was basically
we'll unfurl some of that. So who would have been the right person? Was there somebody, when you looked at all these guys, was there someone that you said, this is a conservative that I think is basically principled, is probably corrupt enough to survive, right? Because you have to have some level of corruption. But was there someone that you thought, or was it maybe somebody that didn't get involved in the first place?
I'm a big believer in the biblical precept, put not your faith in princes. I never look to these guys to save me. I don't think anybody's going to make America great again. I don't think anybody is going to make us stronger together. None of that.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty easygoing, you know. I thought I liked Marco Rubio because he would have moved the party 10 yards to the right. And I always think of it that way, as you're just trying to make a gain. You're not going to win everything. You just want to make a gain. Ted Cruz, basically, you know, he was a little far to the right on the social issues for me, but basically he believed in terms of government everything I believed, especially when he started talking about dismantling the bureaucracy. That really made my heart go pit-a-pat. That's the kind of wonky thing that I love.
Right. How does a conservative, let me stop you for a sec, how does a conservative like you take a guy like Ted Cruz, where you say, I like the individual liberty stuff, the Constitution stuff, and then for, as you said, the social stuff, it doesn't even logically make sense to me. Something like gay marriage or certainly medicinal marijuana, but I would argue legalization altogether. If these guys want limited government and the government out of your personal life, what is the intellectual trapeze that he's dancing through to give him his answer, or is it just political pandering?
No, I don't think that's fair in Cruz's case. The point of view is this, that in order for personal liberty to survive, certain behaviors have to be in place. So marriage, a foundational tradition, you know, it's traditionally foundation of a free society because it creates a self-governing unit. It creates the family, the father, the mother, the children, and they govern themselves, and therefore they don't have to be governed by other people. You have this tremendous problem with out-of-wedlock births and all this, and so that becomes part of the idea of the sort of three stools of conservatism. I believe that to always err toward freedom and solve the problem down the road. You know, I believe this all my life. I mean, I always said during the gay marriage controversies, I don't like the way it was settled. I'm very much against the Supreme Court decision, but that's a very different
We can put that aside for a second, but we can do a little of that, yeah.
But I would tell conservatives, there's no shame in losing when you're right. But we're wrong about gays. They should be, a government that can control who you sleep with and who you love is a government that is way, way, way too strong. It's not a little too strong, it is way too strong for anything that resembles constitutional conservatism.
Did you feel that notion, did that take root with some of your conservative friends?
It was a dividing line almost exactly somewhere around the age of 60. When I would say that at young people's gatherings, everybody would applaud because at this point, for young people, being gay is like being left-handed. They don't care. They could care less. And for me, it's natural to me to leave people alone. It's kind of my natural point of view. It's very frustrating to me, I have to tell you. I have been both a personal and political friend to gay people since I was young, and now I'm old. So we're talking about back in the 70s.
Right. Before it was cool, or it was really cool back then, I guess. Now it's not cool.
There are people walking around this very day who would not come back to my apartment because they met gay people there, who I'm sure, I feel certain, are wearing like the rainbow thing and talking about how brave they are for doing, So that's a little frustrating. But no, I mean, I think that always, when you look back at conservatives through history, they can always connect the dots. It's part of their nature to connect the dots to a disaster. So if we let women vote, disaster. If we let Roman Catholics vote in England, it's a disaster. And I always think, you know what, maybe, but solve the problem down the road. Always err on the side of freedom. And the only thing that confuses the social issues for me is the issue of abortion, and I find it insanely offensive that the issue of, say, gay marriage, who you can love and who you can live with, should be confused with the issue of saving the life of the one person in a room who has no vote, who has no voice, and that those two are somehow the social issues. I find that tremendously confused and offensive. But anyway, that's what I think Ted Cruz is thinking. What he's thinking is marriage is is a pillar of a free society. Don't take the pillar away or the society will collapse.
Right. So basically, you're going to hate me for saying this, I think you might be a liberal conservative.
Well, what I always say is I'm a conservative because I'm a liberal. I think liberals are not liberal anymore. The liberals, I call them leftists. I know you're uncomfortable with that
I don't
word,
like that.
But that's what I call them that because what are they liberal about? Name one thing they're liberal about. They're liberal about sex and drugs, but only because I think those things, if done irresponsibly, enslave you. One of the things that I believe in is you should have any sex you want, but don't ask me to pay for what happens to you. Take drugs, but don't come to me and say, oh, you have to pay for my birth control or you have to pay for my medical care. That's the point. Freedom comes with the responsibility to take care of yourself when things go disastrously wrong.
Right, which they inevitably will, for almost everybody at all.
So what are liberals liberal about? I mean, conservatives are the liberal ones.
Well, I've been saying this now all the time, that defending my liberal values is now becoming a conservative position, which I assure you I don't like saying, and it has caused a lot of people to be angry at me, but c'est la vie. But let's do the abortion thing for a little bit. So are you fully right to life?
I am. I would be satisfied. Here again, just like with gay marriage, I feel the Supreme Court took on authority it doesn't have. The Supreme Court is pretending, when the Supreme Court says you have the right in the Constitution to have an abortion or you have the right to gay marriage, they're not really giving you a right. They're really taking away from you the right to make that decision within your state and your community. They're really stripping you of a right. All the rights that are in the Constitution are negative rights. Don't get in the way of free speech. Don't get in the way of the right to bear arms. Don't infringe. Don't
murder's got to be there's something to that effect.
There are things like the things the government shouldn't do. But having said that, I'm sorry, I've lost the track of the original question.
Are you right to life? Are you
am I right to life? Yes. Yeah. I would be happy if Roe v. Wade were taken away so that we as a free people could debate among ourselves what should be done. I would then be making the argument to be right to life. And I would be content with the decision that my neighbors made, my fellow members of the state made. But it does seem to me that we live in time. I mean, this is the biggest, one of the biggest mistakes people make in argument. We live in time. A baby in a womb, left alone, not touched, will become a full person. It's the only person in an abortion clinic who has no vote, no voice, no way to tell its story, no way to make you weep for it. It seems to me the government can protect that person without infringing on our rights.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the issues that I find has gone so completely haywire, and I think on both sides, because if you listen to people on the right, they make it sound like people on the left hate babies, and if you listen to people on the left, they make it sound like people on the right hate women, and I'm sure that in 90% of those cases, neither of those are true.
I agree.
So how do you, as a society then, how do you take something that someone holds as a real moral principle and negotiate something that's fair? Like I would say, I think a woman has a right to choose, but I do believe that at some level, at least, abortion is murder. So maybe in the first month, this is where, I guess we're talking about real when does life start kind of thing. But like I would say in the first month or two, you could have an abortion, but clearly 3 weeks before a 9-month term pregnancy, that's a living, viable thing. And I've had people on the show saying you could still have an abortion then, which to me that's crazy.
It's insane.
So how do you have that discussion? Because we're not good at that, right? We're not good at, there's some legitimacy to both of your points.
No, we're really bad at it. And TV, just the the nature of television bears a certain responsibility for that. It is just more entertaining, apparently, to have two people scream at each other than to have two people discuss things as civilized human beings.
Second half, we'll get into the screaming.
It's just arm wrestle.
Yeah.
You know, it's a problem because you are talking about an absolute. You're talking about a human life. There's no way to partially kill something. There's no way to have a semi-abortion any more than you can be semi-pregnant. You know, it's the full Monty no matter what you do. But I would be satisfied if, you know, we had, if a state, a locality decided that you had the right to choose for, as you say, a month, somewhere before the brain is fully engaged, and then we could at least preach, because some things have to be achieved through preaching, not through law. We could at least preach that you shouldn't do it, because we can win that argument. I always feel that the right, there are certain things that the right wants legislated that need to be preached instead. I can sit with someone and convince them, especially if I build structures for adoption and giving up children and all that, especially if I build those structures, I might be able to convince people and save lives that way better than I can legislating it and making people go off to some other state and get an abortion there.
Right. So is that where the right has failed in a certain way, that on one hand they're saying, well, we don't want abortion, which whether you agree with their premise,
right,
or with their idea or not, okay. But at the same time, they also don't want to fund things that might allow people to extricate themselves of a pregnancy, meaning they don't want to fund, you know, certain adoption clinics or whatever it is. Like, there's not enough of a safety net for someone to go, I could do this maybe, and maybe I'll get some degree of help.
Well, it's part of the failure that comes with, as government expands, associations fail. And that's one of the problems that we're facing in this country, is there's not enough people doing things independent of government. So everything, the minute a church comes and says, well, give us some faith-based aid, you become an agent of the government. And those adoption services don't need to be funded through taxation. They need to be funded through individual effort. And people do that, and where they do it, they're quite successful.
So what would you say to my friends on the left that would say, well, if the government didn't do it, nobody would do it, and then that would be it?
You know, that's absurd. I mean, that's absurd. The world works very well without, I mean, you know, the left is always talking about the Enlightenment. They know nothing about the Enlightenment. One of the things that they learned in the Enlightenment is that things work. Things work. There's an invisible hand that makes things work without the government telling you what to do. That's kind of one of the lessons of the Enlightenment. The less government there is, the more people grow, the more people associate, the more people give charity. The less government charity is, the more charitable people are. And so I would just say to them, like, you know, you don't have to be in control. There really is the divide, almost more than right and left, because right and left you can argue things. There really is the divide between people who feel that others need to be told what to do and they're the ones to do it, and people like me who feel like, go on your way and don't call me. You're in trouble. You know, I mean, that's really, who just want to leave other people alone.
So you really think that states' rights, in a way, is the answer to a lot of this, right? Because then you're giving the local people back their power, and if you don't like the local laws, take it to another state.
Plus you get the laboratory of democracy. You get, you know, gee, that's working really well in Georgia, but this is working really well in New York, you know, which is better? Why is it working well? Why is this one failing? I mean, that's, you know, what we have in Texas, where you have this incredible job engine, and people should be looking at it and saying, what are they doing that we should be doing? I mean, that's, yes, of course we should be doing that. And every time you bring this up, of course, they bring up the question of black rights in the South and the voting rights, but that's an anomaly. It was a unique situation in which people were being cut out of the process by which states' laws were defined, so that states' rights became invalid. So that's a very, very small window where you had to fix that. But now that it's fixed, you can't just keep using it over and over again as an excuse to take over more and more power for the centralized government, which clearly does not know. Why should people from Chicago who go to Washington know how to govern Texas? It doesn't make any sense. You know?
Right, it does make no sense. So everything that we've discussed so far has virtually nothing to do with anything that Trump ran on.
That's right.
So that's where, as a conservative, again, he might be the president at this very moment. He might not be. But what is the future of the party? Is there an actual future, or did this thing just split to the point that it's irreparable?
Well, one of the things that is most depressing about Donald Trump is that he is, in so many ways, what the left always said we were, but we weren't. You know, I mean, he is this nationalist as opposed to a patriot. I'm making a distinction there, you know. He is this belligerent, he is this kind of know-nothing who goes off half-cocked about Mexicans and this and that. You know, he does all those things that we were always supposed to have done while we were sitting around having highly intelligent, highly educated conversations about classical values, and they were yelling at us that we were Donald Trump. Now we are, you know, and that's a real problem. And he's going to take, whatever happens, he's going to take a certain large portion of the Republican Party with him. Nothing like conservatism can survive. You know, that's European conservatism, which I don't like at all. I mean, the whole point of American conservatism was it was constitutional. It was based on small government. It was not based on America, right or wrong. It was based on, no, these principles, because they're right. That's what it was based on. I think we're going to have to reconstruct that from the ground up. I mean, this is the situation that we're facing, and you can run around, as so many conservatives do, like the proverbial headless chicken, you know, saying the sky is falling, it's all over, we're done. Or you can do, as Rudyard Kipling said, and stoop to build up the entire thing again with your worn out tools, which means we have to begin teaching people the very basic premises that they have forgotten. And all these colleges where they're calling for speech codes, and all these colleges where they shout you down, on YouTube where they take you off the air, they don't remember, they have forgotten why you don't do that. And we have done a bad job of teaching them, and we have to start.
Do you think that, not to put the two of us on such a high pedestal, but that people that exist in our space, that are doing this on YouTube and iTunes and all of the other social channels, that we actually do represent, in a weird way, the last fight against this monster? Because we now know that, I mean, everything from WikiLeaks, again, Hillary's probably president right now, but that everything between politics and media has been so morphed, and they're so in it together. And there's this like sliver of people that are out there putting their views out, whether we agree or disagree on everything is irrelevant, but that we really are becoming like the last bastion of people that are there to fight for some level of freedom.
Yes, but there's something very hopeful about that. It does remind me very much of like when you're in the desert and suddenly a drop of rain falls, life teams out of it, you know, for 10 minutes, and then the rain is gone. You know. And so things like, you know, Ubers, things like Airbnb, all the app trading businesses are creating this kind of vibrant economy that is kind of seeping through the cracks of the regulation, the overregulation and the overtaxation and the you know, looming government political correctness. All these things are leaping to life as the overlords kind of fold in over us. What I'm concerned about with that is that, and everything that the left does creates the opposite result of what they want. And political correctness, which is a cancer on the mind of man, has that exact effect. I mean, I know you're friendly with Milo Yiannopoulos, and I admire much of what he does in terms of media.
Sure.
But no, it does not become acceptable to become an anti-Semite simply because somebody's telling you that it's unacceptable. What the left always does is they take this principle, this small principle of right, like a little piece of yeast, and then they blow it up into this terrible wrong. Political correctness is censorship, it's oppression, it is 1984, but that doesn't mean that the answer to it is to become uncivil and hateful.
Right, and that's what I've said this to Milo publicly and privately. You know, I think there's a space for someone like him, because sometimes there's a certain amount of people that aren't going to listen to Andrew Klavan and Dave Rubin casually and calmly discuss some ideas. So sometimes you need someone throwing out the bombs, I think, to wake people up. And when I was at UCLA with Milo, I saw that there were people there that were liberals that were waking up to some of this stuff, but they needed to hear it from someone like Milo because he just got a certain amount of awakening. That said, for all of the people that all throughout this campaign I heard saying, well, Trump is the answer to political correctness, this is insane, actually.
That's right, but this is what political correctness does. It gives a glamour to bigotry. You know, I mean, I think racism, I think the entire notion of race is a kind of superstition, and I think racism is a mental illness. But when you say to somebody, oh, you said that Obama's president and the world is darkening, you're a racist, it makes people insane, and they start to think like, well, if you're going to tell me I can't, if you're going to shoot me for, a dog, I might as well be a wolf, I might as well really give it to you. And I think that's the conversation that Trump created, where I kept saying, he sounds like he's being politically incorrect, but he's really just being vile. There's a difference, I'm politically incorrect. Milo can be politically incorrect, but it's just vile to denigrate and hate people for things that don't mean very much at all.
What do you make of the idea that over the past couple months, especially the last month or so of the election, that there was a real feeling of the fix is in, I sense that people really think that the underpinnings of what we have going on here are really shaking right now in a way that it never has before, that the whole legitimacy of our government is shaking. That's a dangerous place to be in.
It is a dangerous place, and the fix is in. I mean, I have to say, Trump says the fix is in because he's a narcissist, because he wants to create a little cult around Trump. He says it for all the wrong reasons, but the fix is in. I mean, the IRS silences conservative groups. YouTube takes conservative videos off the air. The press is, look, what the press is doing to Donald Trump, he may deserve, but they did it to Mitt Romney, who didn't deserve it at all. He was stuffing women into binders. It was this horrible. The press is always turning our elections into a battle between good and evil, when what they really are is they are a debate between policies. What are Clinton's policies going to do? What are Trump's policies going to do? What are Romney's policies going to do? What are Obama's policies going to do? Romney would have won that election, but they basically mess with your mind and say, oh, well, he puts his dog on top of a car, and that's really important in a president because something. Now it's time for a commercial. It doesn't.
I forgot about the dog on the car thing.
Man, people feel rightly, justly manipulated, censored, and oppressed. They are right in feeling that, and in their rage, they did what people do. Look, one of the hardest things in life is not being reactionary. You meet people all the time who hold to philosophies that make no sense because their father held to another philosophy and he was an SOB. And that's what people do with their whole lives. And we did that with Donald Trump. We were so angry, justifiably angry. I always say anger is the devil's cocaine because it feels so good, and sometimes it's justifiable, but it still makes you do stupid stuff.
Yeah. So do you think going forward that there could be an alliance of sort of mainstream conservatives and mainstream liberals? And when I say liberals, I'm not talking about the leftists.
It's classical liberals.
But classical liberals. I really do think there is going to be an avenue for the next couple of years where people finally, this election got people to be so bonkers that people finally will go, you know what, so what? I disagree with him on 3 months for an abortion or this, or we disagree on whether gay marriage should have been done by the states or whatever it is, but the basic tenets of how I want to live in a society with these people is okay, and that maybe there could be some new middle.
There can, but people are going to have to start thinking very, very hard about the foundational principles, why we believe what we believe. It's not, whenever I hear politicians say, as Obama says endlessly, that's not who we are, or, our way of life. I always think, don't tell me about our way of life. Our way of life is driving around LA. I don't care about our way of life. That can change. And don't tell me about who we are, because who we are is free, which means the guy next to me is kind of a jerk, and I'm a wonderful guy. But that's freedom. That's what freedom is like. We have got to start talking about foundational principles, and we've got to stop playing down to the passions of the moment.
But can conservatives ever win that? Actually,
they'll win it every time.
Because even a guy like Paul Ryan, who I disagree with on some stuff, I think that he's basically trying to do what you're laying out.
Yeah.
He's trying to say, here's what the role of government should be. Here's why I think it is. All that stuff. But that doesn't get people to show up to rallies and really bring out the vote anymore. It may be morally right, but that doesn't mean it can be successful in just the scheme of how life seems to work these days.
Well, it's a good question, and it's a question of the media. And I think I believe in trickle-down intelligence. I believe in the same way I believe in trickle-down economics. I believe that we have got an academy that has gone entirely wrong. We have got an academy that is censorious, small-minded, ill-educated, ignorant, and is passing those values on to our young. And I think if we stop funding it so much, if we stop giving to our college because we love the football team, and stop saying, hey, dude, you cannot take my child into a class on You can't give my child a degree in English literature without teaching him Shakespeare. You cannot do that. That is not allowed, because that's teaching him ignorance. That's teaching him to be stupid. You cannot do that. Once we start doing that, maybe. Look, I understand the media by nature sensationalizes, but it's kind of the stuff that we believe is sensational. The only revolutionary idea in government anybody ever had was that people should be free.
Yeah.
It's the only thing, and it comes and it goes, and the inertia, the natural progress is toward more slavery, always. So we're always pushing the rock uphill. We shouldn't let that discourage us. That's the game. That's our game. Yeah.
I've asked a bunch of my guests this question, and I've never gotten a consistent answer on this one. Do you think anyone's doing it better than America? For all of our flaws, is there any country that you look to and they say, they really have handled liberty right and the individual right, and their markets really work in a way that I think they should, and yet they're also, their minorities are still treated okay, and the corporations haven't destroyed the little guys? Is someone doing it better than us?
It's a great question. The reason it's almost impossible to answer is because nobody is doing it without us. So the English, I lived in England for 7 years. I love the English. We got along great, but they preen themselves on the ways that they're different from America. But I would always say to them, hey, you're living in our garage. The reason you're not speaking Russian is because of us. So you don't have to pay for your military, so you put that money into something else, and then you make fun of us because we're spending to protect you. You know? And that is true of all of Europe. They're all sitting around going, aren't we lovely? We never fight a war like those ugly Americans. Yeah, because we protect them. Yeah. So it's impossible to say. The fact is, when you ask, is anybody doing it better? Nobody's doing it at all without us. Every single human being who is politically free on the face of the earth, every single one is politically free because of something we did and something we do. And so you can't really get rid of this engine, this protection, this armament of democracy, and then say, well, he's doing it better over there. Yeah, like I said, I lived in England. I loved it. It's in some ways more civilized than it is here because it doesn't have to produce the kind of innovation, the kind of money, the kind of size that it takes to defend England. We do that for it.
Right. But I would imagine that some people would hear you say that, and even if they grant you that the basic premise of what you said is true, they'd still say that we have no right to be all over the place, or we have no right to, or not even no right. What's the point of us protecting all these countries? Even Trump, throughout the campaign, kept saying, why are we protecting Japan?
Yeah.
And all of these things. Why not let Japan protect itself, or at least pay us for those services, which actually it sounds like they kind of do. It was always very confusing to me. But point being, have we sort of gone beyond what we can, our own house isn't in order. Have we just done too much?
Well, it's possible. Obviously, you can't, as the Roman Empire found out, you can't defend everybody if you can't defend yourself. And so, yes, you have to be strong at home, and we are very weak. Our debt is a really, really big problem. And yeah, you can overextend what you do, but one of the beautiful things about America that nobody points out is that we defend all these countries without conquering them. It's never happened before. It's never happened in the history of humankind that somebody has expended the lifeblood and treasure that we have in defense of other people without taking them over.
We give them a lot of shitty fast food.
In England, you'd kill for a McDonald's French fries.
Fair enough. I was down in El Salvador a couple of years ago, and it's a true third world country, and they're burning their garbage outside, which the first day kind of smells good because it smells like marshmallows or something. By day 3, you realize you're inhaling plastic. But I mean, they had all of our fast food joints, and I thought, I guess this is good. But something also didn't seem that great to me. You would grant me that, right? Like at some level. But I guess that's how we change societies, and that's just the first version of it.
Yeah. Well, we're a fairly what's the word I would use? We're a fairly uncouth people. We are a fairly uncouth people, as the Romans were fairly uncouth. And when you look back at, from all this distance at the classical world, there's some way in which the Romans were just a vehicle for spreading Greek culture, Hellenic culture throughout the world. And maybe that's us. Maybe we are here as a vehicle for spreading European culture throughout the world. And we are uncouth and belligerent and violent people, all of those things. But we're the best we've got. And that's, and it's worth defending, and it's worth defending them as well. Freedom is a good thing.
Yeah. So is that the irony ultimately in our whole system, is that, you could take a guy like George W. Bush, who wanted to nation build, and obviously Iraq certainly has not worked out the way that he intended, But then we had 8 years of Obama who sort of was neither here nor there with it at the same time then. So we've watched Iraq slide backwards. Syria, for all intents and purposes, is not a functioning nation state, and we're basically watching a genocide, and over 400,000 people have died. That we're big, we try to do good, sometimes it works, sometimes it temporarily works, and then we take a step back and it gets worse, which is exactly what happened in Iraq. That we've gotten to the point where we're so big and our intentions may be good sometimes and sometimes they aren't, that it's just unwieldy at this point. And it almost doesn't matter who's in charge. I guess that's really my question.
You know, the reason I don't agree with that is because I've seen this before. I've seen what's happening now before with Jimmy Carter. And the left was the media was just as prejudiced then, but not quite as, they're not quite as obvious about it. But they kept saying, oh, well, Carter made a mess. He just made a terrible, terrible mess. And it was because, the same reason Obama is making a mess. George W. Bush made a mess because he was meant to be, like Bill Clinton, a holiday president, and the holiday came to an end on his watch. And that's really what happened. I mean, there was this wonderful explosion because of Ronald Reagan, because he did such a good job solving the problems of his time, not of our time, but of his time. There was this kind of holiday, and Bill Clinton came along, and it didn't really matter what he did. It all kind of went, as long as he didn't mess it up too much, and with Newt Gingrich keeping him in check, they sort of did all this stuff. George W. Bush was set to be exactly that kind of president. He ran on things like education and stuff like this, these kind of minor little things that he was going to do in a time of peace. The holiday came to an end, and he was called upon to be Winston Churchill, basically, and he wasn't. Right. He was not that guy, and that's a shame. But Barack Obama has been a thoroughly incompetent president for a different reason. It's because his philosophy is wrong. His philosophy does not describe the world, okay? And so they used to say that about Carter. They say, well, nobody can govern. And then Reagan came along and governed quite well, thank you very much. He did a very, very good job. He wasn't always right. He might have, said some silly things, whatever. He did a good job of bringing the country back under control and bringing the world to some extent back under control. Obama is just, everything Obama thinks is true is false. That doesn't make him a bad guy. It just means he's been trained in a philosophy that does not describe the world accurately. So when he presses the red button and he thinks the blue stick is going to fly off this way instead of the water squirts in his face, that's his problem. So yes, it's a complex, big country, but you can still govern it if your philosophy describes the world realistically.
So would you say his philosophy, when he gave that Egypt speech before he was president, and then we had this red line fiasco in Syria. At the time I was on air at the Young Turks, I was every day saying we should not be in Syria, let other people clean up this one. But I did recognize that once the red line was staked out, that if you do that and then don't do your follow through, that the ramifications will be horrendous.
Right.
And that is exactly what's happened here. So I think basically what you're saying is that his guiding principle was it was like a nice idea, but in practice, you can't say things and not do them because the bad guys get badder and the good guys start worrying.
He has this phobia of colonialism, and so anytime we act in the world as what we are to some extent, an imperial power, he becomes hysterical. And you have a situation where, I have mixed feelings about what happened in Iraq. I think it was really poorly done. Even if it was the right decision, it was poorly done. But that war was won. It was over. And he panicked and pulled out because he's got this philosophy of anti-colonialism.
Wait, I know the comment section is going to be saying, but Bush signed the withdrawal of...
It's nonsense. It would not have happened that way, under Bush, and they would have had. They just needed a few forces there, as many as are there now, to
which were going up,
and they're going up. So now he's turned it into Vietnam. He does not know how an economy works. He doesn't know how the world works. He has been trained in this left-wing philosophy that simply doesn't describe the machinery of the world, and every time a society becomes socialist, unless it has this great big capitalist America to protect it in its socialism, 70 years and it falls apart. 70 years is the lifespan of socialism, and it is destroyed. And so he was trained in this idea that's just not true, and he's so arrogant, and he too is a narcissist. He too has a narcissistic disorder, I think. He doesn't change his mind when the facts don't bear him out. He just says, oh, everything's going great, and the press backs him up because of their racial pathology.
Could you possibly have a president that wouldn't have a narcissistic personality?
It's a good question.
I mean, really,
no, that's a fair question.
It sounds ridiculous, but really, I mean, what type of person, forgetting not just the power that you would have, not just the desire for the power, but I mean, you would have to be so narcissistic just to go through the process, which, as we know, can be quite horrific.
Yes, and I mean, I think what has really happened with Obama is this country has a racial pathology that is dealing with its past in a very poor way. It's like post-traumatic stress disorder. The fact that this guy is an incompetent and the first black president is something that cannot break through the narrative that the media want to tell. He is being incompetent while black is just being incompetent. You know, that's all it is. And it's not a knock on other black people who are being competent. It's not a knock on anybody except the guy who's being incompetent. The reporting on him has been insanely one-sided. And because what you say is true, you need an incredible ego to do what he's doing. It needs to be attacked every single day by the press en masse. They should be saying, you're doing the wrong thing. The press was terribly unfair to George W. Bush. I was all for it. Go ahead, be unfair to him, but be just as unfair to Barack Obama. And they haven't been anything like, even as unfair as they were. They haven't been even as tough as they were on Clinton.
Yeah, it's funny. During most of the Bush administration, I lived on the Upper West Side of New York City. This is liberal, right? And I remember at the end of the Bush administration, they'd have the book fairs outside, right outside by Zabar's 80th Street, and every single book was about George Bush is the devil. George Bush is the devil. Every single one. And I remember thinking, even though I didn't think he was a great president, but I didn't think he was the devil. I remember thinking, this is actually kind of good because we have a press and a media that's fighting against the power. And that's, I think, really what you're saying here is that we really lost that in these last 8 years. And in a way, that then fed the Trump thing. Because then it was easy for Trump to go, see, they all backed Obama, now they're backing Hillary, and here you go.
That's absolutely right. They were doing exactly to Trump what they did to Mitt Romney, and the only difference is that Trump deserves it. But at the same time, remember, it's what I call the Che Guevara effect. Like if you walk around wearing a T-shirt that has Heinrich Himmler on it, somebody's going to say like, dude, but you walk around with Che Guevara, who was an evil, mass-murdering thug who helped enslave a nation, and it's like, oh wow, Che. You can make a movie about Che and what a great guy he was. Try doing that with Himmler, It's the same. And I feel the same thing is true of Hillary Clinton, that her evil is normalized by the atmosphere, by the intellectual atmosphere that's created by the press, whereas Trump's wickedness is obvious to everybody.